Hello everyone, GoldenNova here, and my favorite time of year is upon us, Spooky Month! So we'll be checking in on some of the game's darkest, most heinous creatures, so you're better prepared to deal with them when you come across them in a dark alley. Or, you know, at your locals. Both are equally terrifying places. Today, we're going to cover a series of monsters based on the works of the love that shall not be craft, the Entities. While not a proper deck per se, many members of the theme have found their ways into game-breaking combos, as well as just being really good utility monsters. So today's video is less a how to play Entities, and more of a bestiary of the kinds of creatures from beyond that you can contact to forge an unhuman alliance with. So let's... Explained. Today's episode is brought to you by my lovely patrons and the fine people over at Dragon Shield. If you want to protect your cards with the strongest scales on the market that even come with their own lore while supporting the channel, use my affiliate link in the description. So, what's the deal with the Entities? Well, they're a series of monsters who all live in the extra deck and are divided into three categories: Elder Entities for the fusions, Old Entities for the synchros, and Outer Entities for the Xyzs. Many of them are either level or rank 4, but otherwise have a wide range of effects, spanning the distance between spot removal to locking your opponent out of the game. How fun! They're also, as stated beforehand, based on several beings from the Lovecraftian mythos, but I'm going to avoid going into detail about the specifics, mainly because several of them are largely based on established mythologies, and considering the author that adapted them, well, that means they come with a lot of baggage to unpack, and I'm not currently equipped to handle that right now. Though if we, say, made a whole video specifically about that topic, well, let's just say I'd love to hear your opinion down in the comments. Let's start with the Elder Entities, and probably the most notorious of them all, Elder Entity Norden, a level 4 Water Fairy fusion monster with 2000 attack and 2200 defense, requiring 2 Synchro and or Xyz monsters as material. And when this card is special summoned, you can target a level 4 or lower monster in your grave and special summon it. Now, on the surface, this seems pretty low power. I mean, who's gonna go through all the trouble of getting 2 other extra deck monsters on board, then spending a fusion effect all to get a pretty limited revive? And it's about this time that you realize that I'm pulling one of my classic japes, because this card is so broken that it's banned. And that's largely due to its interaction with another card that they refuse to ban for some reason, Instant Fusion. By using it to summon NordVPN here, you could grab another level 4 for almost any relevant rank 4 monster, or even get a tuner to make a 6 synchro. And what's worse is that Instant Fusion would make it a legit summon, because it counts as a fusion summon when used. This means you can revive Norden to get the effect again, because it triggers on special summon, not fusion summon. This was played in basically everything, because it does everything. The game revolves around effects like this, so it was an easy include, and the better your deck was, the better this card got. Various techs were introduced to maximize the power of this Elder Entity. I'm looking at you, Bashia, but it all came to a head around the time of Zodiacs. Turns out the rank 4 Xyz deck that only needs a single copy of any of their monsters to function works pretty well with the monster that summons them out of the grave for free. They were so desperate to run this that eventually lists would land on Fusion Substitute, which you could search out of your deck by discarding a Lunalight Black Sheep, because this spell counts as polymerization at all times, even during deck building. And because Black Sheep is a Beast Warrior monster, it was also searchable by the Fire Formation Tenkis they were already using. From that point, you would hard fuse using 2 Xyz monsters that had already used their effects, overlay the resulting monsters into Daigusto Emerald to recycle them so you could access their effects again, then use Fusion Substitute's Grave effect to put Norden back in your extra deck, which not only would load it up for a later usage, but would draw you a card as well. Hey have I mentioned yet that Norden's effect is not once per turn? So with the right hand, you could be using this twice or even 3 times in a single turn. Suffice it to say, this card was basically an auto include and not exactly in a great equalizer kind of way. So it kinda deserves the ban. And I mean, imagine what it could do nowadays with SP Little Knight on the horizon. So it is with a heavy heart that I continue to condemn this wild looking old man riding a shell driven by a literal seahorse. What a waste of good art. Elder entity Intis is a level 4 light fairy fusion monster with 2500 attack and 1200 defense, requiring a synchro and an Xyz monster as material, and must be special summoned from the extra deck by sending the above cards you control to the grave, and you can only special summon copies of this card once per turn. And once per turn, you can special summon a level 4 monster from your hand, and if this card is sent to the grave, you can target a card on the field and destroy it. So it seems like Intis has fixed a lot of the issues that Norden had. You can't summon more than one in a turn, it summons from the hand so it's a more reasonable resource pool, and even has a harder to fulfill summon requirement, needing to have both a synchro and an Xyz, limiting the kinds of decks that can run this. It does have a small concession where you don't need to have a fusion spell to actually summon this, but even that is kind of a knock towards fusion substitute, making that card less useful. It feels like everything about Intis was made as a response to Norden, and because it was more balanced, no one ever played it. Well, at least for that part of the card. That's right, I've pulled another of my signature capers upon your expectations, because it found a whole new avenue to break into the game. When sending cards directly from the extra deck to the grave became popular, Intis ended up being a favorite card to send, giving the associated effect an extra little boon of removal, and was pretty unconditional at that. So, while it didn't get its time in the combo spotlight, it would nonetheless see widespread play in decks like Dogmatica and Ritual themes that use the extra deck as a resource, and by that, I mean any deck that ran Diviner of the Herald. Now, because of that, you might think that this cosmic power has missed the mark, but trust me, Intis don't miss. Okay, now it's time for the synchros. Old Entity Cthugua is a level 4 Fire Pyro Synchro monster with 2200 attack and 200 defense, requiring generic material. If this card is synchro summoned, you can return all rank 4 Xyz monsters on the field to the extra deck. If you fusion summon using this card as fusion material, you draw a card, and an Xyz monster that was summoned using this card on the field as Xyz material gains this effect. If it's Xyz summoned, draw a card, which basically makes this a worse cap shell. Like, you only get value from half the extra deck types that cap shell does, and you have to get this out of the extra deck first to even use it. So the focus is going to be on using its on summon effect as best you can, while getting a boost from the extra draw when you're done with it. And while it's a very situational removal tool, if you're on a rank 4 deck looking to recycle its monsters, this isn't terrible, though you would also need to have an engine that makes level 4 synchros in a rank 4 deck, and in case you aren't aware, those two don't exactly have natural synergies. Yeah, you're gonna learn pretty quickly that the old entities aren't exactly the same game-breaking threats as their siblings. But hey, now you know what those tentacles do though. Absolutely nothing. Old Entity Hastur is a level 4 Wind Reptile Synchro monster with 2300 attack and 1000 defense, requiring generic material. And if this card is sent from the monster zone to the grave, you can target a face-up monster your opponent controls and equip this card from your grave to that monster. That monster can't attack, and also its effects are negated. And if this card leaves the field while equipped to an opponent's monster by this effect, take control of the monster this card was equipped to. This is easily the most interesting of the entity cards, as well as having the most potential. If not within the current card pool, then in some design space that hasn't been explored yet. Like, it all begins by sending it from the monster zone to the grave in any way, which means it's compatible with every extra deck summoning mechanic outside of Xyz, which then locks down an opponent's monster so it can't be used. Then, if you utilize a card like Omega Judgment to pop more of your opponent's cards, you blow up this as part of it, and then you also get to permanently take what it was equipped to, which in and of itself makes it very flavorful considering the source material, but that's neither here nor there. One day, we'll get a deck that can spit out level 4 synchros like it's nobody's business, but until then, it's gotta stay far away from the field of battle, until we give it a sign. Now let's take a crack at those Xyz monsters. Outer Entity Nyarla is a rank 4 Earth Fiend Xyz monster with 0 attack and 2600 defense, requiring 2 level 4 monsters as material. When this card is Xyz summoned, you can discard any number of cards to increase this card's rank by the number of discarded cards. And once per turn, while this card has Xyz material, you can target a monster in your grave. Detach all material from this card, and if you do, attach that target to this card as material. When a monster is attached by this effect, this card's type and attribute become the same as that monster's original attribute. So at first, you read this effect and it seems a little strange. It does a lot to change its various variables, but not much else. But then you remember that one of the big sub-themes of Xyz monsters are the rank-up magics, which often check for things like rank, type, and attribute, all things that Nyarla can change. So now you have an Xyz that's an avenue for accessing strange and interesting rank up monsters you otherwise wouldn't be able to. But that's not what it ended up being famous for. Its primary function is no longer available, and we'll get to that in just a second, but it can still be used to effectively recycle graveyard triggers. Remember how I said that Intis was diviner of the Herald fodder? Well, Nyarla is kind of the same, though does it in a mid to late game capacity once you set things up. It does so using its attach monsters from Grave effect, so every time you switch out the material, you get a little extra bonus. In fact, the truly sadistic would do things like send a Herald of the Arclight to grave, then hard synchro that same monster just to use it as material for Nyarla. Then you would essentially swap one of those Arclights for the other, getting you the ritual search, and putting another one under Nyarla, letting you do the whole thing again next turn. And the longer it stuck around, the more often you could pull this prank, raking in even more value. It's a pretty cheesy card with some real body horror looking art, but naming it after Nyarlathotep really undercuts its menace in the modern day. Like, you know, Nya! Urla. Outer Entity Azathoth is a rank 5 Dark Fiend Xyz monster with 2400 attack and 0 defense, requiring 3 level 5 monsters as material. But you can also Xyz summon this card by using an Outer Entity Xyz monster you control as material, transferring all of its material over. Azathoth can't be used as Xyz material, so you're not able to just stack one on top of the other, and after this card was Xyz summoned, your opponent cannot activate monster effects for the rest of the turn. If this card has at least 3 Xyz material, one each of Fusion, Synchro, and Xyz, you can detach a material from this card to destroy all cards your opponent controls. Hey, that's pretty nifty. If it was still legal, you would use Norden to get either of the old entities, overlay for Nyarla, go right for Azathoth, then blow up their entire field without ever having to worry about a retaliatory monster effect. I wish I lived in such a world. It sounds more fun. No, Azathoth was used primarily for its heinous ability to lock out an entire mechanic for a whole turn. Any level 4 monsters could essentially turn into this thing, which shuts off most hand traps for some very safe setups. And you know that thing I said earlier about rank up magics being incorporated into Xyz's last section? Yeah, that actually comes up here, because this was really easy to make in Phantom Knights or any dark pile that incorporated them. All you had to do was make Time Thief Redoer and search rank up magic launch using either Ancient Cloak or Silent Boots. Then you send Redoer on a little trip, banishing it for a bit, and it would come back with no material, making it a valid target for launch. Then you would flip that spell during your opponent's main phase as soon as you got the chance, turning Redoer into Azathoth, effectively meaning your opponent had a very small window to use monster effects on their very own turn, before they got shut out for good. Not as bad as Kali Yuga, but still pretty crummy. This card is also on the forbidden list for its crimes, but I'm a lot less sympathetic towards this one. I'm sure it and Shockmaster are gonna have a lot to talk about in jail. Hashtag do not unlock the shock. Alright, that's all of our monsters accounted for. Now it's time for the spells and traps. Forbidden Trapezahedron is a normal spell card that you can activate if you control exactly 2 monster card types among Fusion, Synchro, and Xyz, and applies the following effect based on those types. If you control Fusion and Synchro, special summon an Outer Entity Xyz monster from your extra deck, and if you do, attach this card to it as material. If you control Synchro and Xyz, special summon an Elder Entity Fusion monster from your extra deck, and if you control an Xyz and Fusion monster, special summon an Old Entity Synchro monster from your extra deck. So basically, if you have 2 of the card types, you get the entity monster that fills the 3rd slot. So if you're a deck that focuses on any of those 2 kinds of summons, you get another little friend as a treat. The problem is that, well, a third of our options are currently banned, and those were the really powerful ones you'd want to build around. You're no longer able to sneak in 2 free materials with Norden, and Azathoth is out of the question, and the rest feel a little underwhelming, though is probably the only situation in which summoning Cthugwa is feasible. So that's, you know, something. It's a pretty piece of jewelry, but I'd suggest leaving it alone. Not only is it a beacon beyond our mortal ken, this box is just screaming Mimic, and I'm not in the mood to fight one right now. Dreamland is a field spell card that can activate a variety of effects depending on the kinds of monster card types on the field. If there's a fusion, once per turn, if any number of monsters are sent from your hand or field to the grave by a card effect, except during the damage step, you can draw a card. If a synchro is on the field, when any number of monsters are normal or special summoned to the field, except during the damage step, you can increase their levels by 1. And if there's an Xyz monster, once per turn, during your end phase, destroy the monster on the field with the highest level. Unlike Trapezahedron, this is more thematically tied to the entities via their source material, as opposed to an actual mechanical connection, but it does cover those core card types, and each effect is meant to enhance that kind of card type's playstyle. For instance, fusion effects will largely send your cards to the grave, so this gets you a draw on top of it. Modulating levels is very much a synchro thing to do, and blowing up a monster based on its level is no issue to the kinds of monsters that don't have any. It's a pretty niche card, but I wouldn't be surprised to see this crop up every once in a while as a silly tech pick, if not a competitive one. My big question here is though, are the Dreamlands Prospit or Durst? And do you think Nemlyria is gonna be there? The next two cards are a bit more referential than anything else, so we're just gonna power through those. Dark Contract with the Entities is a continuous spell card that gives a ton of bonuses depending on the DDD monster card type special summon from your extra deck. This does cover the usual 3, but adds pendulums in to presumably account for the DDD pendulum monsters, though it does mean it either breaks the cycle or heralds a fourth, more unspeakable entity that has pendulum scales. But the big connection here is that Nyarla is literally featured on a page in this book, and honestly, I didn't think the contracts with the great beings from beyond would be so tidy. Forbidden Apocrypha is a normal trap card that punishes decks for investing in multiple of the same extra deck monster card type, which would fall in line with the entities incentivizing the usage of multiple. It even has a picture of a creature that looks like Cthugua to solidify the connection, though it also has the art for Seal of the Ancients on here, but seeing what all of your opponent's face down cards are doesn't seem to line up with, anything. Though I guess since these are ancient creatures, looking into mysteries only to find these frightening fiends might be the real story all along. And that's all I really have to say about entities. Normally I finish off these videos with tech picks and a Nova scale, but it's not really a format that lends itself to these collections of cards. They're more defined by what these cards can do for other themes, as opposed to what they can do for themselves, even more so than the World Legacy cards. Maybe in the future, when the designers decide to give us the proper entity archetype, we can make a little companion piece to this video. But until such times are upon us, I'd recommend keeping your curiosity in check. After all, you never know what you'll find. But now, I want to hear what you all have to say. Are the entities like Norden and Azathoth just misunderstood, or should they stay in their foul pits of unbeing for all eternity? And which one's your favorite? I might have tipped my hand a bit, but I really like Hastur. Its art and effects are savage. Let me know down in the comments, and if you haven't already, please make sure to like this video, subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and share this video with somebody you know who loves Yu-Gi-Oh! It really does a lot to help me out. Today's episode was brought to you in part by Dragon Shield. When you want to protect your cards with the power of dragon scales, get some sweet lore for them, and support the channel, check out my link in the description to get started. Today's episode is also brought to you by my lovely patrons, including the illustrious Quasar Commander Green Knight, Nebula Navigator's 3rd Dynasty, Ada Basilisk, Adam Zajdel, Andrew Newman, Avi Chali, Kane Senpai, Chibi Gohan, Christopher Fuss, Clockswork, Danny Bound, Dark Dragon X830, Eric, Aaron the World Breaker, Frankie, Garland Chaos, Genesis Yukio, Great Big Pillock, Hairbear, Harry the Ominous Benefactor, Howling Zangetsu, Hydrocraft 135, Iron Zero, Iskander 711, Mana Charge, Marion James E. Bacata, Marluxia Zagirl, Mega Combi, Molly Renata, Nathan Vig, Orozco 09096, Panther J, Rebel King Lucifer, RJ the Jank Monarch, Sammy Haim, Sir Knight JCB, Skybuster Leo, Sophie, apparently, The Wizard Moose and Xander Wolfensberger, Cosmic Crusaders Almento 5010, A Random Pup, Ariel Kersey, Beluga Masta, Blue Gem, Chaz Ghost, Corbinisms, Drachenwald, Drake and SpongeBob be like, you used to call me on your shell phone, Dripfed Tar, Eki Bullock, Eva Padilla, Hike Boyagian, Herbal D, Inblink, Jester Designs, Kale the Dragon, Carp, Kevon Public, King Scarlet Yu-Gi-Oh!, Lemon Yu-Gi-Oh!, Lord Whoop-De-Doo, Manga Pages, Matt Simmons, Michael Shimabukuro, Nitromo, Ruxith Sarani, Shizuka Nijimura, Stephen Williamson, the legendary Raven, Tucker Ordorn, Venusian Teapot, and Zeldreka, as well as the wonderful Starlight Explorers you see on screen now. If you'd like to be a part of these credits, get early access to videos, determine what videos I make, and many more benefits, it would mean the world to me if you check my Patreon page in the description or consider joining as a YouTube member. And if you enjoyed this video about strange elder beings from beyond our realm, perhaps you would enjoy hearing about giant unknowable creatures from below our realm in this video covering subterrors. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.